My name is Shannon Jones, and I'm here today to give a presentation on educational technology and implications for educators and administrators. Today we will be looking at different aspects such as safety, ethical considerations, and legal considerations that involve educational technology in the classroom today. First, we'll take a look at some stats on technology in public schools. 97% of public school classrooms have at least one computer for student use, according to a research done in 2009. In 2008, the ratio of students to computers was 3.1 to 1. This is up from the year 2000 when the ratio was 6.6 students per computer in the classroom. And 93% of student computers in public schools have internet access, according to research done in 2010. One of the first things that we're going to look at in light of all the additional technology in the classroom is safety. One option that educators and administrators have for safe technology use in schools is to employ internet filtering software. Internet filtering software will block websites that contain words or phrases that have been considered inappropriate for student access. One downside of filtering software is that they can keep students from being able to make searches they need, because the software is broad and it just generally blocks words and phrases that have been deemed inappropriate without taking a look at the actual content. For example, there may be a website that addresses human reproduction in a technological manner that the student needs to access, but because of certain words or phrases that are within the website, the student will not be able to access what they need for their research. Internet filtering software can also interfere with a student's ability to use Web 2.0 technology such as blogs or wiki pages. It may block these, and then the student can't use them for collaboration and other important tools that they need to use for their learning. There are other options for monitoring student internet use. Educators can implement a curriculum that teaches students how to use the internet safely and responsibly. They can also use a filtering software that's customizable so that it will only block certain things and it will allow other things in for research. And it can physically monitor students' internet usage. The Children's Internet Protection Act of 2001 requires schools to pass an internet safety policy to prevent students from viewing inappropriate material on the internet. However, this act didn't require that it be a technology-based way of monitoring internet usage by students. So teachers can physically stand behind students or monitor a computer lab to make sure that students are using the internet appropriately. Another aspect of safety with educational technology is cyberbullying. In the year 2007, as many as 50% of students surveyed reported they had been the victim of cyberbullying. Cyberbullying, by definition, is bullying that takes place through technological means such as phone, internet, texting, email, etc. High school students are more likely to be victimized by a cyberbully than younger students, but students as young as 10 to 12 years old have been targeted by cyberbullies also. 40% of cyberbullying victims did not know who their attacker was. Here's a short video that we're going to watch that may be a useful resource to you to show your students to touch on the topic of cyberbullying as a way to introduce a curriculum to them on how to prevent it and how to stop it.
We spend lots of time online. We text, we comment, we share. It's a big part of our lives. Communicating with someone online is just like talking to them in real life. Everyone appreciates comments, but no one likes it when people make sense or gossip or lies. The fact is, some people do spread their lies online. It's called cyberbullying, and it's a lose-lose situation. It makes the person being harassed feel bad, and it makes the bully look bad.
The website listed at the end of that video is an excellent resource for educators to begin to help students understand the implications and the seriousness of cyberbullying. There's a wealth of information on the internet, and if you refer to your handout, you can see under additional resources that I gave another website that has more information for you on how to help your students understand. So then, in talking about cyberbullying, we need to look at how cyberbullying can be addressed. Administration should find an anti-bullying curriculum that meets the needs of the specific population served. A general one-size-fits-all curriculum that doesn't touch on topics that are specific to your school district will not take care of the problem. And make sure that your bullying curriculum also addresses cyberbullying, so that it's a more current anti-bullying curriculum. The most effective programs are ones where parents and educators work together to prevent and stop cyberbullying. When parents and educators are on the same page, they can work together the most effectively to target students to help them understand the seriousness and to prevent or stop cyberbullying before it occurs. Another important factor is educator buy-in. A study done in 2012 showed that 60% of the educators surveyed were not sure if their school really needed a formal curriculum that addresses bullying. Administrators should offer training and professional development to help educators understand the far-reaching negative impact of cyberbullying on students. With educator buy-in, the curriculum will be addressed more effectively, and then it will help students better. The next section that we're going to look at in this talk on educational technology is the legal implications of educational technology in the classroom. The first thing we're going to look at is copyright and the fair use doctrine. Some use of copyrighted materials by educators and students is protected by the fair use doctrine. Copyright materials are materials that cannot be reused by people without permission from the original author. The fair use doctrine allows some portions or some pieces of material to be used even though they are copyrighted. There are some definite guidelines to the fair use doctrine, however. Students can use copyrighted materials in classroom presentations, but they would need permission from the original author to use these materials if they left the classroom with their presentation. So if your student uses particular material that they found from a book on the internet, etc., and they keep it within the classroom, then the fair use doctrine protects that from copyright infringement. But if they take their presentation to a district level or they take it out of district to another school, it is no longer protected by fair use doctrine. Not everything that is downloaded from the internet is in the public domain. There are so many materials nowadays for educators that they can reuse in their classroom. That's just one click and you download it and you can use it with your students. But not everything is in the public domain. Not everything is free from copyright restrictions. Software, educational or not, is also protected by copyright laws and cannot be copied from multiple classrooms or from multiple schools to use. So, all software that's used per different rooms has to be purchased. Educators can use some materials in their presentations as long as they are not making a profit from their presentation. Some principles to look at when considering the fair use doctrine, according to Leary and Parker in 2011. The purpose and character of the work. This means that whether or not the work is being used in an educational setting. The fair use doctrine does cover the use of some materials to some extent within an educational setting. Another principle to look at is the nature of the work. Is it real info instead of a unique work? If it's information that's just common knowledge, information from history books, statistics, those are things that can be used under fair use doctrine, and they don't need, and they're not protected by copyright. An original work by an author is protected by copyright. You also have to look at the amount of the work being used. Is it a small portion or is the majority of the piece being used? You cannot copy an entire book for your students to use in reading. You would have to purchase the books for them to read in an English class or other class. But you can copy paragraphs, small portion of a chapter, a small part of the whole work. And then the last thing you have to look at is the potential market effect the use has on the original work. So this means, is access to the work used restricted? For example, is the work being used only in one classroom, a presentation that I made and delivered just to my classroom, as opposed to being used within the district, being sent around to different schools, being used by more than one presenter, etc. So those are principles to consider when using the fair use doctrine. The last part that we're going to look at in my talk today is the ethical implications of the increase of educational technology in the classroom. Ethical considerations for educators. It is the responsibility of educators and administrators to understand copyright laws and fair use doctrine. The fair use doctrine does not give educators free rein to use any material that they please for educational purposes. Just because it's for educational purposes does not mean that you can automatically use it. You have to look at the fair use doctrine, and at some of those considerations that I listed on the last slide when taking into consideration what you're going to use. Educators should also explain copyright laws to students so that they will learn to follow them. Even students are not exempt from lawsuits for copyright infringement charges. This has become a more common occurrence in recent years. So it's the responsibility of the educator to let students know what their restrictions are so that they will learn to use technology ethically and responsibly. Another ethical consideration is an acceptable use policy. An acceptable use policy is one way that staff can circumvent some ethical issues and implement this acceptable use policy within the school district. Not all schools have a written acceptable use policy in place. A study done in 2008 showed that 84% of schools had a policy in place to address email use. 76% had a policy to address social network sites. So, as you can see, there's still a discrepancy, and that not all schools have an acceptable use policy that is written and in place. A beneficial acceptable use policy is one that requires users to follow copyright laws, requires users to use school computers and technological devices only for school purposes. So, therefore, students can't check Facebook on their computer. Educators can't check their personal email on computer unless there was some reason that they had an email in their personal account that might have to do with school use. And then another aspect of a beneficial acceptable use policy is that it reminds users that they do not have the expectation of privacy. Anything in their school email, anything they search on the internet while they're on a school computer on school time can be looked at by administration or by the school board and can be seen, so they need to understand that anything they look for can be scrutinized. And then this is a list of references that I used for my talk today. In conclusion, there has been a vast increase in educational technology in classrooms in recent years. And in keeping up with the times, educators and administrators need to be aware of different implications that concern them. They need to make sure that they are keeping students safe and teaching students how to use the internet safely. They need to make sure that they are taking legal and ethical considerations into thought when they use educational technology in the classroom. Thank you for your time today, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation.